Hello and welcome to Bad Review. Today we're going to look at first issue special, issue 1. This is from 1975, put out by DC Comics, of course, as you can see. And it's introducing Atlas. This was written, edited, and drawn by Jack Kirby. Since Kirby's work, I think, was slipping a little bit in the 70s, before it really got bad in the 80s. I have mixed feelings about this. I'm not a huge Jack Kirby fan to begin with, so take that for what it is. But this is an okay issue. I've seen a lot worse from his mid 70s stuff, but unfortunately the story suffers. The cover art's really cool. It's got an action scene. It got a lot going on. Unfortunately, you really don't see that imagery in the book. There is some fighting, but it's sort of a convoluted storyline. Like they're building up to something and the payoff just isn't there. Now, if you've ever seen the movie Conan the Barbarian, you've pretty much read this. Mainly it's about a guy named Atlas whose family was killed. His father was killed, and most of his tribe was killed, and his mother was taken captive by this guy that looks sort of vaguely lizard-like and has a serpent on his helmet. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? I kept looking for him to say that the helmet had a sun and a moon coming together, but yeah, it just the art wasn't really quite Kirby's best. It's honestly a little trite, I think, and they try and go into this thing about people that live in a people of the crystal, that was just kind of this weird thing that the kid's tribe was supposed to be, and they never really explain how he's like superhumanly strong. He just sort of is. Yeah, it's very convoluted, and it likes to jump back and forth. So the very beginning of the story is actually the end of the story, and it leaves you on a cliffhanger, but it's never resolved because it's a one-shot storyline. And you were supposed to write in and say, hey, we want to read more of this guy, but it never really happened. Issue 2 picks up with a totally different storyline with totally different people. So yeah, it's definitely not an issue I would recommend per se, unless you're a Kirby completionist or you're just looking for some throwaway characters that were rarely ever used. I don't recall ever actually seeing Atlas after this. I think he did pop up in some places, but I've never actually read them. Not that I can remember anyway. So he's kind of one of those Kirby characters that just kind of vanished into the ether, and just nothing ever came of him. And they have a lot of stuff like that in DC's catalog, where they were trying out new stuff, and all companies do. But this one was a little bit of a waste of time, in my opinion. It's interesting that they were doing an entire series of like one-shot adventures, but not having a resolution really hurt the story. I think it was overall kind of a goofy Conan knockoff, and his outfit is just blatantly ridiculous. He wears a hood with no shirt. I don't understand that at all. And he has some sort of like pseudo utility belt thing that doesn't seem to serve a function. But yeah, overall, this one's a miss for me. I didn't care for it. I thought the story was overly used, bland, predictable, even for the 70s. And the fact that it's almost complete ripoff of Conan really didn't help. I know the movie came later, but I'm pretty sure the origin story is the same in the books and the comics of the time. So yeah, it's a pretty uninspired storyline. The character doesn't seem all that original. You're never really explained how he got his powers. Was he born that way? Whatever. There's none of that. So yeah, I'm gonna have to say this one's definitely a miss for me. It's like a lot of the 70s DC stuff. It's either really fun or it's really stupid. And I would have to go with this one being kind of dumb. So, yeah, that's going to do it for this one. That's first issue special, introducing Atlas. It's issue 1. We're going to look at the other issues in this series, so be sure to check back for those. And there were only 13 issues in this series, so they did introduce some interesting stuff and have some good characters. But That'll do it for this one. Thanks for listening. We hope to see you on the next one. Hello, and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. Today we're looking at first issue special number 2. This is from 1975 by DC Comics. And this one introduces us to the Green Team. This is a group of boy millionaires. And they're all, I don't know, around 12-ish. So we got the Commodore, who's a shipping tycoon. We got J.P. Houston, an oil magnate with his 6 guns. Then we have Cecil Sunbeam, the Star Maker. And the newest addition who joins the group in this issue is Abdul. He's a shoeshine who mistakenly gets a bunch of money from the bank, and then he makes a bunch of money on the stock market on some nonsense, and the bank gets their money back, and he becomes a millionaire, joins the boy millionaires. And this has to be one of the dumbest comic books I have ever read. Not only was it incredibly infantilizing, all of the characters are walking stereotypes. Of course, the oil magnate, whose last name, of course, is Houston, talks like partner and says all these cliche things and shoots things with his 6 guns. The Commodore's a stuck-up boat guy, and Cecil Sunbeam talks like some weird hippie. It's horrible dialogue even for the 70s, but it's so convoluted. The story makes almost no sense. These kids invest in adventure, but they don't really go on any adventures. They just sort of talk about adventures. So it's a really boring read, and it feels very contrived and very forced. Like somebody's on a deadline and they had to squirt this mess out. So now I know you're thinking, well, who did this? Well, believe it or not, it was Joe Simon and Jerry Grandetti. I don't know who this Grandetti, I can't pronounce that, is off the top of my head, but of course, Joe Simon, most listeners will recognize that name. So it's really shocking that Joe Simon did this because it is obviously aimed at younger audiences, but is an incredibly poorly written piece of work. It was clearly done just because they wanted to introduce some new characters and aim at a younger audience. But the action is boring and pretty lame. The premise is ludicrous. Much like Prez, which also came out at the same time, where an 18-year-old gets elected president, and it's sort of hippie nonsense. This is kind of along those lines. It's got this real corny, dated feel. And if you're looking for some real bad 70s stuff, this is definitely up in the ballpark. But this is just awful. The art's fine, actually. The art's okay, but everybody's drawn in these weird stereotypes, and the dialogue is worse than a stereotype. It's dated for its time, so I can see why this one never really caught on. I know they did reboot this a few years back, I think in 2016, to try and bring back the Green Team, and it only lasted a few issues. But they actually included like a female character in that one. I'll try and track one down to read. But this one is just completely stupid. It's 4 rich boys that just go around buying things. It's like Richie Rich, but less over less over the top humor and more kind of low end, low brow attempts at jokes. Like it's definitely written by somebody that's older and like middle age that can't relate to kids well, and probably didn't have any kids or had kids that were much older than this. So the dialogue is incredibly rigid. They don't sound like kids even for the 70s. They're just walking cliches. So this one was a real big miss for me. I have to say this is just easily one of the dumbest things I've ever read. So if you're looking for something to read that is just awful, then yeah, then the Green Team is definitely your mark. But this is first issue special number 1, which introduces the Green Team. Uh, First issue special issue 2, I should say. I'm sorry, from 1975, Green Team Boy Millionaires. You can find a copy for a couple bucks. It's not worth much. Um, I'm kind of surprised it's worth anything, honestly, but I definitely won't pay $2 for it. that people are trying to get. It's more of a 50 Cent bin. Very forgettable story, very forgettable characters. Probably best to be forgotten in DC's archives. But that'll do it for this one. To see you on the next episode. Thanks for listening. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. This time we are looking at first issue special number 3. This was with Metamorpho, the Elemental Man, or the Element Man, real name Rex Mason. Now, this one, Metamorpho and his girlfriend are with her daddykins, as the story says, and his simian sidekick / chauffeur. And they're in Washington, D.C., admiring the Lincoln Memorial, when suddenly there's a spooky phantom pops up out of nowhere, and he has a French accent and a sword cane. Now, he looks suspiciously like a cheap knockoff of Lon Chaney's lost film character from London After Midnight. If you don't know that movie, it's because nobody's seen it since it was lost forever. But the imagery, some of the stills are still around, and it looks like that. But he's got a French accent and a sword cane that shoots like lasers or something. It's a little vague. Now, because this was 1970s, the stories are definitely skewed toward a younger reader, but it's an interesting idea. Metamorpho is kind of a silly character. You can transform into cars and goofy stuff like that, and whatever MacGuffin they need at the moment. But he has to figure out what's going on with this weird phantom, and they hear a news report that the Phantom actually appeared during the Civil War and during Woodrow Wilson's administration when he was drawn into World War One, and then to Franklin Roosevelt, the morning of Pearl Harbor, and this thing's supposedly been haunting D.C. for centuries. And then you come to find out that this guy's name's Destiny. It's spelled silly, of course, but it's Dr. Akil Destiny, and Metamorpho calls him Doc Destiny. Now, that's a pretty catchy name, so you'd think, all right, it's a pretty cool villain. No, not really. He's kind of stupid, but it is actually a cool concept for a villain, somebody that's been haunting Washington, D.C. for a lot of years and has a lot of resentment toward the government. Could make a cool character, but yeah, they kind of kill him off in the end, or he appears to be dead. And I don't think I've seen that character pop up too much. So, but anyway, he's trying to destroy the Capitol Dome and all this. And meanwhile, Rex's girlfriend's dad is trying to loot the vaults and get a bunch of gold. And of course, his plans are thwarted because he's inept and bungling with his simian sidekick. And Rex defeats their plans to steal the gold away from the ghost. So yeah, it's a self-contained story, and of course at the end, like every other issue so far, if you want to see more of the character, you're supposed to write in. But this was 75, so that's long past due. And Metamorpho's been around as a guest appearance many, many times in other books. So all in all, an okay story. It's very dated. A lot of the slang, like daddykins and what's he call his girlfriend? Just the way they talk is very, very dated. They talk about making out, and he says "Holy Blue Hannah" and some other goofy things like that. That just people don't say much. He calls somebody hairy brains. Calls people like Stagsy, stuff like that. Just goofy slang things that were probably dated at the time. But overall, it was a fun concept. Nowadays, probably would have been a 2 or 3 issue story. So yeah, not bad. Worth a read if you like Metamorpho. I think the villain really definitely could use a reboot. He had potential, but I don't recall seeing him in other stuff. Dr. Destiny sounds familiar, but I think it might be a different character. So yeah, that's first issue special number 3 with Metamorpho, the Element Man, Rex Mason. Pretty good story if you like Silver Age stuff, or for younger readers. It's not very valuable. It's like $2 or $3 to pick up. But yeah, it was a good Silver Age type book from DC if you like that sort of thing. If you're not really into DC or 70s stuff, probably not going to be for you. Otherwise, yeah, that'll do it for this one. As always, thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you on the next episode. Hello, and welcome back to Bad Review. Today we are looking at first issue special number 4, featuring Lady Cop. That's right, Lady Cop. A cop can be a lady. So, the book opens with a woman watching her 2 roommates get strangled to death while she hides under a bed. After being comforted by a very mannish lady cop, she's suggested to enroll in the police academy and become a lady cop, which of course she does. And that's up to page 3 now. Now this the little story is written by Robert Kanigher, I think that's how it's pronounced, with art by John Rosenberg and Vince Coletta. The cover is actually really nice. I think very dynamic, has a lot going on. That scene is like a whole page at best. It doesn't really have anything to do with the overall plot. Now we've got the setup that she saw her friends murdered, and they were killed by somebody who leaves Ace of Spades cards and has these real distinctive boots. But just ignore that, because we'll never see that again in the rest of the book, except the very, very end. And it's not a resolved plot line. Now remember, this book was supposed to introduce new characters that might get their own book or research old characters. But the story here is called Poisoned Love, and as far as I know, this is the only lady cop story. But she seems to fight a lot of like skeevy, weird street crime by herself in a skirt. So she rescues some underage girl, maybe a prostitute, kind of unclear, from these 1970s toughs who really one of whom wears a really ugly purple vest. And then she beats the crap out of 2 of them using her girl kung fu and judo that they learned in police academy. And then, for some reason, she doesn't need to handcuff them. She doesn't even have a gun. She just is some lady in a miniskirt with a badge. Like, that's it. It's pretty weak. Then she buys some poor black kid an ice cream cone, foils a robbery of a guy with a knife by beating the crap out of him, then giving CPR to the stereotypical Latin convenience store owner. This whole thing is like a blaxploitation movie without the main character showing up. Then she goes to the beach with her boyfriend, and they do some making out. And then she meets some girl on a pier who's gonna jump in because her boyfriend got a VD and she might have a VD. And we get a little lesson on sexually transmitted diseases. It's riveting, I tell you. Here's some dialogue from Lady Cop. And this is on page 11. VD's deceptive. Girls may not have symptoms, but it's a secret destroyer poisoning you like an underground river. It can cause blindness, insanity, death, if not arrested in time. Wow, dramatic much? So the girl asks, what do I do? And she says, go to your family doctor immediately, or the Board of Health VD stations. They'll give you tests to see if you have it. They can cure you with antibiotics. Well, these days that'd be a little different with those antibiotic-resistant strains, especially of gonorrhea. But don't think about that. Psh, nothing to see here. It may not be the syphilis that'll drive you insane. But there's some more bad analogies, and then she takes the girl to see the girl's father, and he goes to punch her because she's a dirty whore. It's not explicitly said. It says, your mother was a saint, and then he takes a swing at her, but Lady Cop gets in the way and takes a right hook to the face. And then is still standing like this. She's a tank. What can I say? Sure, she's like 5'5" and 80 pounds or whatever, but yeah, she took a right hook to the face, still standing, just knocked her hat back a little bit. And then the guy just says mea culpa a couple times, I don't care. And then some other guy shows up that was friends with the guys she arrested earlier, and he's the one with the chain on the cover. And within 2 panels, he's in the water and she's saving him. And that's the whole issue. That's the whole story. Pretty weak, in my opinion. It was an interesting concept. It could have been like a girl version of T.J. Hooker if T.J. Hooker had been around. But overall, I would say that it was just a rambling mess that really went nowhere. It wasn't even a good origin story. Like, alright, she's a lady cop. Is she investigating anything? No, it's a bunch of little street scenes on her beat. It's a little slice of life stories. Vignettes, but poorly done. So yeah, I would say this one's pretty wretched issue. The concept of, like, the life of a female cop could have been interesting in 75 when female police officers were, especially beat officers, were a lot more rare. But she doesn't even have a gun. That's weird. The kind of beat cop even in the 70s didn't have a gun, especially in 70s New York City. Really? Are you kidding me? Especially in the sketchy neighborhoods she's in. So I don't really understand that. And that I found that very confusing and a little frustrating. So, yeah, this could have been a much better story if it was a little more focused on, like, busting up a drug ring or something like that. Something that had a full issue plot to it that this one did not have and really needed. So, yeah, from a standpoint of modern eye, it's definitely a terrible story, and the premise is archaic, but for its time, I can see what they were going for. I just think they failed at it. If they want to revitalize Lady Cop, it could be an interesting story about, like, a female police officer, busting up gangs or something, or fighting crime. Like a Real Cops of Broward County sort of thing. And it could be cool. It could have some cool adventures. There's a lot of dangerous stuff going on in the world that they could kind of touch on. But this one didn't do any of that. It just had a bunch of stereotypical minority characters and poor people. And she gets in random fights with random street toughs that don't make a lot of sense. And the weird VD thing, I don't really know where that came from. So yeah, I don't really get the point of this issue. I don't think they knew what to do with it either. But it could have been something a lot more interesting and probably pretty progressive if they had taken it a little bit more seriously and made the character a little bit more of an actual hero as opposed to somebody that just wanders aimlessly into stuff and is like, oh, this is happening, what's going on here? No, she's not portrayed as a fully capable, fleshed out character. She's just somebody that happens to be there and knows some crappy martial arts and fights idiots. So yeah, I would definitely say that as a relic of the past, it's interesting, but beyond that, I didn't see much point in it. So unfortunately for first issue special, this is not their best issue, but I think they really could revitalize this and maybe make it into like a Cagney and Lacey kind of thing. Or an Adam 12 with a couple of lady cops that are, teamed up together that got to go fight some crime. That could be cool. Maybe put them on Gotham PD or something. If they want to keep it grounded, they could put it in LA or somewhere in Florida. There's always weird crap going on in Florida. Just type in Florida Man and you'll get tons of cool story ideas for a lady cop team up. So, yeah, I don't know. Concept could have been cool, very poorly executed. But that'll do it for this one. As always, thanks for listening and supporting the channel. Be sure and watch some of our other episodes. And next time, we'll be looking at first issue special number 5. We're going to go through all 13 issues. But until then, that'll do it. Thanks for listening. Hello and welcome back. Today we are looking at first issue special number 5, featuring Manhunter. 1975 was a weird year for DC. Alright, so first of all, the cover is awesome looking. It's a Jack Kirby cover, and it's got a disembodied head hanging from a peg on the wall. You got the Manhunter in the background, looking ready for action. Pretty cool. And you know what? That actually appears in the story. It's on the first page. Now, this is sort of an origin story for Manhunter, and it's written by Jack Kirby and drawn by him. And I gotta admit, some of the art looks really cool. I'm not a huge Jack Kirby fan, as I've stated before, and will probably many times in the future. But I really dig some of the art in this one. The story opens on Manhunter going into this wall of heads, they call it, or this cavern of heads, and all the heads look really cool and kind of creepy. And Manhunter looks really cool as he confronts, on this 2-page spread, he's confronting somebody named Chopper, which is a stupid villain name, by the way. But the guy looks pretty cool. He looks kind of alien, but it's just a mask. And they fight it out. The bad guy gets the drop on Manhunter and drops what he calls the electric head on Manhunter's noggin to try and make him into one of the masks on the wall. So, yeah, that's pretty cool. The electric head sounds vaguely like a Rob Zombie song. I think that is the name of a Rob Zombie song. So, as a Rob Zombie fan, I appreciate that. But since this predates that by quite a bit, but still a cool phrasing, cool gadget. When that doesn't kill Manhunter, the guy comes at him with an axe. They duke it out. He fries the guy, but he's feeling kind of old, because he is old. He takes his mask off, and he's some old-looking guy of, I don't know, maybe Asian, maybe Caucasian. I can't really tell with Kirby's art style. Then we cut to Mark Shaw, public defender, who's sort of a failure, apparently, at his job. He's trying to defend an innocent man, but things don't go well. He's having a rough time of it, and his uncle shares with him his secret room full of treasures to show him that there are other people that believe in justice. There was an old sect called the Shan, and they were members of a warrior culture who fought in justice of warlords, and he has a suit similar to the Manhunter. It looks very Asian-y. And he pulls out some magic medallion with a lion on it that's supposed to contact these people. Then we jump to chapter 3, where this Grand Master is talking to the current Manhunter, who's like, I'm old, I need a replacement. And they're like, we're the last ones. And just then, Mark Shaw says, hello, my name is Mark Shaw, through this giant weird lion statue. It's not explained where their technology comes from, why they have these, like, blaster rods, or batons, whatever they're called. I'm sure somebody will yell at me for not knowing that one. And then it just skips over to days later, at Mark's uncle's house again, and he's got the Manhunter costume on. We don't know why. Maybe they FedExed it? I'm not sure. It's not explained. All it says is that he got a box that arrived today, and it's got a lion logo on it. So he's trying on his goofy outfit, which actually looks kind of cool in this one. The Manhunters were pretty cool when they were like the Space Corps kind of guys. I think they were robots for a while too. But anyway, this just kind of rambling goes into nowhere as some thugs show up and attack, and he beats the crap out of him. But they know who he is. His uncle calls him Mark, and they're at his uncle's house. It's pretty obvious his secret identity. And they just tie these guys up. And then he's like, I'm going to go after your boss. Who sent you? And they say, it was Al Beefer, the hog. That's an actual quote. Al Beefer, the hog. Wouldn't they call him like the cow? Because his last name is Beefer? I don't... That's not funny, okay? Even for the 70s. Anyway... yeah, he wants to go serve some justice, so he goes out in search of Al Beefer on foot, and then they cut to a scene of the Manhunter guys from the Shan saying, oh, he's off on his first task. Well, we'll see how this goes. And the next image is, final panel is of some really fat-faced guy with really monstrously big lips, and that's where it ends. It ends on yet another cliffhanger. Like, just do a self-contained story. Don't give me this tease stuff where you give me half of a story that's really irritating. But every issue does this. They're trying to develop new characters, trying to introduce replacements for old characters. I don't think this is the first appearance of Manhunter. It might be, but if it is, it's a terrible first appearance. But I'm pretty sure Manhunter appeared before this. But overall, I'd have to say the story's okay. It needed some tweaks, I think. I think they were just letting Kirby do kind of whatever he wanted at this point. But it's not a bad story. It's an interesting introduction to the Manhunter concept. The Cave of Heads was really cool. I thought that was probably the best part. Overall, the art's not bad. It's typical Kirby style. Not really my thing, but I could see why people like it. I like all the contraptions and stuff. It actually worked in this one. So yeah, it was a bit of a mixed bag. As far as 70s books go, it definitely has that same 70s flair that you'd expect. Beyond that, it was not a self-contained story. There's no follow-up. As far as I know, the storyline was never resolved. And it really didn't do much to further the characters. There was no real character development. I would have liked to have had this spread out into like a 2 or 3 part story where they go into more about Mark Shaw getting the Manhunter costume and using it, what its abilities and limitations are. None of that is presented here. They just apparently just mailed him a box and they're like, congratulations, you're in the club. Not exactly a rigid testing system. That would have been a little more interesting, but we don't get that. So overall, it was a decent 70s story, but there was a lot more they could have done with it. I was a little disappointed overall, but not a bad story. But that'll do it for this one. That's my review, and we hope to see you on the next one. Thanks for listening. Hello, and welcome back to Bad Review. Today we're looking at First Issue Special, Issue 6 of the 13th issue run. This one features a story by Jack Kirby with art by Jack Kirby called Welcome to the Dingbats of Danger Street. It's as dumb as it sounds. So we're introduced to the 4 Dingbats. We got Good Looks, Non-Fat, who wears a t-shirt that says Skinny Power. Then we have Crunch, who's sort of their brick and looks like he has the downs. And then there's a guy called Bananas because he's crazy. Yay. Okay, so just on initial look, like I said, Crunch looks like he's like a dwarf with Down syndrome or something. Bananas is the worst kind of stereotype of an Asian I've ever seen. Non-fat is just some malnourished kid wearing a t-shirt that says Skinny Power. That's the whole character. And Good Looks, well, he looks like I don't know. He looks special too. Oh, well, you flip the page after the introduction of the characters and bam, you're in a chase scene. Some bad guy in red tights with a big mustache is running from the cops. And the Dingbats flub up his plan, and you get a bunch of really awful dialogue like Crumb and the Fuzz and Snatched, and the slang is so outdated. If you think your slang is cool now, wait 5 years. You won't be using that slang anymore, most likely. And everybody a generation after you, in 10, 15, 20 years, is going to laugh at it because it's going to sound ridiculous. So this suffers heavily from that. There's all sorts of just awful humor. Like, the cover looks like Kirby art, but it looks like imitated Kirby art. And that kind of continues in. This is not his best work. People look silly, except for the Gasser, who's the villain for most of the book. The other guy, Jumpin' Jack, was just some cheesy Batroc the Leaper knockoff. But the Gasser actually has a cool frog-like mask with these. It's supposed to look more like a gas mask sort of thing with some hoses on the top and these like frog-like lips. All right, he looks okay. That's a villain I could get behind. I don't know about the rest though. It's pretty terrible. So Jumpin' Jack got busted by the cops because of the Dingbats, but he dropped a microfilm canister, and the Gasser shows up to try and get that. There's some shenanigans. It's really cheesy, but he gets away in a camper van of all things, which is a very weird looking camper van. And one of the Dingbats, Mr. Non-Fat, is on top of the vehicle, and the others are goofing around, and the bananas one says something stupid and he rolls around on an oil drum. I don't know, this is dumb. But Non-Fat, of course, gets spotted and caught. Meanwhile, the cops are interrogating Jumpin' Jack, and the kids come by to drop off the microfilm that he dropped, and Jumpin' Jack escapes in his super generic underoos leotard thing. And the cops are like, we gotta get him. This'll work. We could follow him to their hideout. And the kids are like, and I'm gonna quote this here, Jumpin' Jack's partner got one of us Dingbats. So if you're going after him, we want to go too. And the cop, of course, responds with, that makes sense. Come along. So, yeah, that's how you get fired from the police department, endangering the life of 3 children. I mean, these kids are like 12 to 14, I suppose. So anyway, they follow Jumpin' Jack, and they're like, cheese it, it's the cops. Because they meet up in some arbitrary spot. Deserted waterfront pier. Yeah, this is so bad. So, of course, then a gunfight happens, and Detective Mullins puts the kibosh on the gasser, and the other cops put their guns in the face of Jumpin' Jack, and they arrest them, and yay! And the other kid, the kid and the executive that was kidnapped are fine. So terrible. Through the whole thing, Non-Fat keeps kicking people and hurting himself, and it's really dumb. And the kids are just like some random latchkey kids. I don't know, they're just not interesting. Even the supposed crazy kid isn't that crazy. He's just like on the spectrum or something. This has to be one of the worst comic books I've ever read. Not because it didn't have a coherent story. It just had a terrible coherent story. This was almost painful. And it's 1970s, so it's incredibly dated slang. It's not funny. It wasn't funny for the time, and there's just nothing redeeming about it. I do not recommend this issue. It was not cringy bad, we have to make fun of it kind of bad. Like a good B movie. No, it wasn't that at all. It was just some stuff's happening. It's not interesting. A little bit of action that doesn't make any sense with these random stray children that are unattended by adults. It's not clear if they're homeless or they're just lurking around on Danger Street. So I don't know. Kirby earned his paycheck by producing the most boring thing I think of his career. I've read some stuff that I wasn't real impressed with by Kirby before, but this is a whole new level. So I can't recommend this even as like it's so awful you gotta see this kind of thing. Nope, it's just boring. Characters are uninteresting, they're dumb, I don't care about any of them. The gasser was kind of cool for costuming. That's it. Doesn't even say if it really takes place in the DC universe. Doesn't seem to. I'd like to see more of the gasser, but that's about it. So yeah, this is swing and a miss. It's pretty horrible stuff. But that'll do it for this one. As always, thank you for listening, and we hope to see you on the next episode. Hello, and welcome back to Bad Review. Today we're looking at First Issue Special, Issue 7, featuring the Creeper. So we get a return of the Creeper in this one. Apparently he had been absent from comics for a while. And this issue is where the series of First Issue Special diverges from the issues we've seen up to this point. The Creeper's an established character. He's been around for a while, and not only is he back, but we also have a different creative team. So instead of Jack Kirby issues, now we have an issue written by Michael Fleischer and art by Steve Ditko and Mike Royer. The editor was Joe Orlando. All these guys have been around for ages. Some of them I think Steve Ditko's dead, but Joe Orlando was around for ages. So this issue definitely had promise at the beginning, I thought. So at the first page there where we get the credits, we get a little teaser of the Creeper falling off into some fire. And now if you look at the cover and you're looking at it thinking, oh my gosh, who's the guy in the goofy costume? Well, I'd say which one. The one in yellow is the Creeper. The other one is Firefly. He's an old Batman villain. Now, why is a Batman villain fighting some guy called the Creeper? Well, I'll have you know that the Creeper runs around Gotham City. Or at least he used to. I haven't seen him around, but I haven't been reading comics for a while. So the story opens in Gotham Bay, where the Gotham Penitentiary is, which I think is now Blackgate Prison. I think they actually gave it a name. But I think it's the same structure, because Blackgate's on the island. And I'm pretty sure the Gotham Penitentiary is. So we open with the warden giving a tour to the Creeper, whose alter ego is Jack Ryder. He's a TV commentator, sort of a pseudo-investigative reporter. If they bring the Creeper back, they probably will make him like a political pundit or something like that, like almost like a Sean Hannity or Bill O'Reilly or Tucker Carlson type, if you know who those people are. So that would be a little more interesting to see how the political dynamics of that, instead of just the usual social justice characters. Try making one of them on the other side. So we've got a tour where Ryder is walked through the prison, and it's not exactly a high security prison. And we see a brief appearance by the Scarecrow, Two-Face, and then they come across this guy. He's like, "Who's this?" And the warden's like, "Oh, this is Garfield Lynns. He was put in isolation for attacking another inmate. He used to commit crimes under the name the Firefly until Batman bagged him years ago." That was an actual quote. I didn't write that crappy dialogue. So the warden doesn't even know this guy's case file. So they continue on with the tour, and we cut back to Lynns, who's like, "Oh, it's a good thing the warden's a moron who doesn't read files." Paraphrasing here. And he says, "I'm grateful for the warden's ignorance. Had he appreciated my true talents, he never would have let me work backstage during the annual prison play." Because this Firefly, isn't necessarily the Firefly that came about later in the 80s and 90s. This one was more like Mysterio, where he worked with lighting effects and illusions. So he also creates lasers and stuff like that. So this guy was able to steal some lenses and lighting filaments to build what he calls a laser lighter, which melts the bars of his cell. He runs out and then promptly zaps a guard and probably burned a hole through his chest because he just melted some steel beams with that thing. Well, that, of course, sets off the alarm, and Mr. Ryder runs off. Instead of going where he's supposed to, he ditches the cameraman, ducks around a corner, and turns into the Creeper. Professor Yats, we're told, entrusted him with something called his power formula, and implanted a molecular transmuter inside of his body, which is hidden under his wristwatch where the activator is. So he just hits that and turns into the Creeper. We got all that backstory on how the Creeper got his powers in one panel, which is a nice way to introduce the character. You gotta stop screwing with the flow of the story and get right into it. Get to the action. So he turns into the Creeper, and he has this little laughter thing he does. And since he kind of looks like the Joker, they can play on that a little bit. There was a really cool story where the Creeper actually fought the Joker. But anyway, so he goes after the Firefly, but he gets there before the cops do, and he gets zapped by the laser thing, and he gets knocked down, and then by the time he gets up, the cops are there, and they think he's in on it, because he's one of them pesky vigilantes. So he's got to take off, knocks the guards down, runs off, and then promptly ducks around and turns back into Jack Ryder. So the warden's like, "Oh, I told you to stay in my office, blah, blah." And he's like, you know us media types. He was hoping to get, of course, the picture or whatever. So then, meanwhile, we cut back to Firefly, who is hiding out at a lighthouse where he left stashed a bunch of his old gear, and gets his goofy costume, and he goes to recruit some thugs, has to impress them by, like, disintegrating one of their friends, and dematerialize him temporarily with his molecular disassembler. And he's like, "You guys want to join me or what?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, sure, why not?" Meanwhile, Ryder's trying to convince his boss to let him say the Creeper may be one of the good guys. He's like, "Whatever, nuh-uh." So he has to incriminate himself in the crime by saying that the Creeper may have been in on it. And then they get a tip that there's a fire at the Skytop Diamond Exchange. So, of course, Ryder's on the case. He's got to get out there. And, while his camera crew's filming the disaster, he's like, oh, I'm going to go interview some people, and turns into the Creeper and runs up to the top of the building to stop the Firefly. He gets up there and with his trademark laughter, scares some of the thugs. They get in a big fight, he beats the crap out of the thugs, and Firefly zaps him with an electro lighter, whatever that is. But it hits him, he falls off the building, and everybody's like, holy crap. Firefly gets away, Creeper wakes up in the prison. He's in the detention ward, General Hospital rather, and they're like, how are you alive? He's like, yeah, you know. So the doctor's like, I'd like to run some tests on you. And he's like, yeah, sure, doc. That's the ticket. And as soon as they shut the door, he busts out of the handcuffs, pulls the rails off the window, and flees the scene. And of course, Firefly was stupid enough to make a offhanded comment about light duty. And that was a term meaning fees paid by ships for the maintenance and upkeep of lighthouses. And of course the Creeper knew that because he's, you know, a genius or something. The plan was for Firefly to steal some diamonds off a ship, but that can't happen now because the Creeper's there to beat the crap out of him. And they get into it, and Firefly tries to zap him, but Creeper manages to grab a piece of glass from the lighthouse window that he busted through and reflect the light back at him, which knocks Firefly off of the lighthouse, plummeting to his death. And we're not sure if he's actually dead, but it's pretty heavily implied. Then the Creeper just laughs and the issue ends. That's it. That's the story. It's actually a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun reading this. It was silly. I can't say it was bad. It was a real strange one. It was nice to see the Creeper again. I like the Creeper. I think he's very underutilized, and it's hard for him to really get a solo book. He's more of a support character. So when he shows up in these like one-shot stories or two-parters, I always like to pick him up when I can find him. They did a short series of him in the mid-90s, late 90s maybe. It didn't last long, but I thought it was pretty good. So I like the Creeper. I think he's got a nice simplistic costume. It's really weird looking, and it makes him kind of this strange, goofy sideshow type character, and it kind of works for him. So if you're a Creeper fan or you've never read him, I recommend checking this out. It's a great introduction to the character. This issue's not worth a lot. It's going for about $2, $3 on eBay. And if you're looking for something to read that doesn't have like heavy-handed social issues or anything like that, you just want a nice action book, this one really fills that role. The dialogue's a little dated, granted, because it is from the 70s. It's a self-contained story with a goofy, obscure Batman villain that, is kind of fun. So I would say go for it. Check this one out if you want to read some 70s books that are actually not bad. This one's pretty good, especially for DC at the time. They were really starting to kind of work their way out of the kiddie market into more of the teens and young adult, where Marvel was already doing that at this point. This is pre-Crisis, so they haven't quite aimed for the more mature audience yet, but they were definitely working in that direction by now. But that'll do it for this one. As always, thanks for listening, and we hope to see you on the next episode. Hello, and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. Today we're looking at first issue special number 8. This one features the first appearance of Travis Morgan as we enter the lost world of the Warlord. Now, Warlord is an interesting character. It's a new take on barbarians. Instead of just your usual fantasy stuff that was going on in comics in the 70s, like Conan and Kull, they decided to take a regular human and drop him into a fantasy setting. So he left the modern world in 1969 while on a recon mission flying a Blackbird to take photos of the Russians. The Russians spotted him, launched some missiles, his ship gets hit and goes down. He's losing fuel, so he's got to land somewhere. So he's thinking he can make it to Alaska by flying over the North Pole. So while he's flying, he spots some clear land among the clouds. So he's like, oh, I should land here. Well, he ends up having to bail out in what he thinks is the Yukon territory, but it's not. So he bails out, lands in what is obviously a jungle, And he's a little confused by this because it's really hot out. He thought it was 6 p.m., but it's always daytime. So he's walking around. He has a survival vest with a few things: knife, compass, 38 special, and 12 rounds of ammo. So as he walks around, he comes across a woman in trouble, and this is Tara, or Tara, more likely. And he sees her being attacked by a carnivorous saurian of Earth's Jurassic Age. I don't know how to pronounce that word. It's a dinosaur. So he jumps into action and tries to kill it. He gets his butt handed to him. He shot it 6 times with his 38 revolver, but that didn't kill it. And he goes into melee with it, and it's tearing him up. And she comes in and actually saves him by driving her sword through it. But when he tries to talk to her and thank her, she can't understand him. So her language is different and somehow strangely familiar. But he doesn't know what it is. So she goes to lead the way out, but they get ambushed by some soldiers. And he quickly reloads his firearm, kills a few of them. And the leader rallies his troops for another go. He kills the leader. The final group, he knows he has 1 bullet left, and the group rallies, but they decide that it's just not worth it. So Travis surrenders with his lady friend, who is not happy about it, and they get taken to a large city where they see the king and this sketchy looking visor of sorts, some sort of high priest named Demos, who is very, very evil. And he has this black orb which he wants to test Morgan with. So he holds it up, and Morgan gets this beam shot to his head, and it's going to make him black out. So he pulls his pistol out, takes a shot, blows up the orb. And they think he's some kind of god then. So they give him the special treatment, get him this really tight-fitting, ugly outfit, and some swashbuckler boots. And he gets treated really well. And when he takes a nap, somehow time gets away from him, I guess, and he grows a beard for whatever reason. And he trims it up a little bit so it looks a little bit more swashbucklery. And the woman, Tara, teaches him a little bit of the language, because time means nothing here. So, since he was an Air Force pilot in the Cold War, he did learn Russian. So he has no problem picking up the language. He apparently has no problem with languages. So he learns that the land is Skartaris. That's the country they're in. The actual world name is Tartarus or Tartarus. He learns that she is from Shambhala. That's her homeland, and her party of hunters was ambushed. They're more of a barbarian tribe. They were ambushed by the people of this village or city, and Morgan spouts off his theory that he is in the Hollow Earth. I think they later retcon that, so it's just like an alternate dimension. But he thinks he's in the Hollow Earth, which is a popular theory that's been around for a while. You can look that up. So she says he's crazy because he claims he flew in on a plane. Well, one of the servants overheard this and decides to report his lack of godhood to Demos, who quickly thanks the lady and turns her into a snake because he's just a scumbag. And he sends some soldiers to murder Travis. Well, that doesn't work out. Travis and Tara quickly dispatch the thugs and escape out into the woods, headed for her homeland. And that's where the issue ends. Now, Warlord did become a regular series. So since today's Wednesday, we're going to have Warlord Wednesdays. I believe the entire collection of the Warlord series. Volume 1 has 133 issues. Volume 2 was I think a 6-part miniseries, and then there were 2 shorter series that came after that. I think one was 12 issues, and the other one was right around there as well. But I think I have all of them, so we'll just make Wednesdays Warlord Wednesdays. So if you want to learn more about Travis Morgan's adventures, I'll be reviewing those. But I thought this issue was great. It was a lot of fun. The pacing was amazing. The art was great. It's Mike Grell writing and drawing it. I think Joe Orlando was the editor. I got it right here. Let me look. And overall, it was a real tight story. Yeah, edited by Joe Orlando. Very fast-paced. A little bit of the dialogue is slightly dated because, some of the terminology is different from the 70s to now. Because this was from 1975. But overall, this was just a fantastic adventure story. I think that Warlord was definitely one of the better fantasy books out there. You know, a guy from the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, being trapped in this primitive world with magic and swords, and he has to fight to become, you know, to survive, basically, with all these cool people that he meets as spellcasters, barbarians, shapeshifters, etc. And I think this issue really set it up really well. It's really well written. The art's great. It's got a lot of adventure and action. Doesn't take time to goof off into tangential things. It's all story related and plot driven. And I really like that, especially because it's a pretty complete story. So the fact that it leads into the regular series is a big bonus. So we'll take a look at that in another episode. We'll look at issue 1. But I really like this. This is a great introduction to the character. It's a more interesting character than most of the other ones that we've seen so far. Like, this is leaps and bounds better than Dingbats on Danger Street. And even Atlas was kind of dumb comparatively. This was way more fun. And if you like fantasy stuff, this is definitely for you. But that's going to do it for this one. I really like the cover art that actually appears in the story. You know, he's fighting the dinosaur on the cover. And we get a shot of Tara. I'm going to probably alternate back and forth on the pronunciation because I'm not 100% sure on that one. But we get her jumping at it with the sword. It was a fun book. This one is probably the most expensive of the entire run of first issue special because it's the first appearance of the Warlord. But it's well worth it. It was a lot of fun. But that'll do it for this one. Thanks as always for listening, and we hope to see you on the next episode. Hello and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. Today I was reading first issue special number 9 featuring Dr. Fate. I always liked Dr. Fate, so I was pretty excited to read it. It was written by Martin Pascoe and Walt Simonson did the art. Jerry Conway was the editor, and that's a pretty good lineup. I'm not that familiar with Martin Pascoe, but this was a fun issue. We start out with Dr. Fate zipping out of his tower to go and find out what's going on. Some mystical powers told him that wackiness was afoot and he had to stop it. It was, quote, foretold. And he shows up at the Boston Museum of Egyptology only to discover that there are a couple of dead people and that there's a mummy on the loose named Khalees or Kali. I think it's Khalees. I don't know. And Dr. Fate's like, age-old prophecy came true. A fight ensues. It's pretty cool, actually. And Dr. Fate gets knocked out, and the bad guy steals his amulet. It's the Amulet of Anubis, and this guy appears to be a servant of Anubis. Dr. Fate's pretty messed up, so he flies back to his tower where he collapses and resumes his mortal form of Kent Nelson. His wife Inza is there, and she's very frustrated with him. But we learn that there is a bathroom in Dr. Fate's tower because we can see part of the toilet, and she gets him some medication. She gets mad that he falls asleep, so she throws the cup and storms off in a huff and says she's leaving him. And Dr. Fate, Kent, goes down to the basement and does some research on Khalees, and we get some backstory about how he was a servant of Anubis, and the Amulet of Anubis was a reward for destroying a temple to Bast. Nabu, the guy that trained Dr. Fate, didn't like that this guy was destroying stuff and gathering slaves. Khalees was trying to build a pyramid in homage to Anubis, and Nabu, being a powerful wizard, put the kibosh on that. So he took the amulet away from him, freeing the slaves from the spell they were under, and they mummified Khalees alive. But Anubis said that he would have long life in death so that he could continue to serve him. But this was all new information for Dr. Fate. He didn't know anything about this. And then we get a little recap of his origin story, which goes on for several pages, about how he was 12-year-old following his father, Sven Nelson, who was an archaeologist/explorer, and they stumbled upon this cave in the Valley of and they went inside, and it was the kid found the suspended body of Nabu and freed him, but the gas that had preserved him in place also killed Sven, and the kid was real upset but Naboo cast a spell on him, erased the memories of the pain, and imbued him with all these powers, and he became sort of schizophrenic from the sound of it, where he's Dr. Fate and Kent Nelson, and the personalities are distinctly different. Then we cut back, and the wife is a little upset that maybe she betrayed him a little too easily, and she goes out to see what she can do. In the meantime, Dr. Fate's hunting down Khalees, and they get in a big fight, which is pretty cool. This Khalees guy looks pretty sweet in the mummy outfit, actually. So we get this really cool splash scene on page 13. It's a big panel of Dr. Fate zapping the guy with the Ankhs floating around and energy beams, and pretty cool shot. I really like that. I like a lot of Walt Simonson's work. It's not always the greatest, but that was a cool scene. Then the guy takes off, and Dr. Fate runs into Nelson's wife, who tells him that she found a seal on the coffin that has an invocation on it, and that's very useful to him. So Dr. Fate takes off, and somebody dropped a sphinx and a pyramid in the middle of the city, and obviously that was Khalees. But he summons Anubis, and Anubis is mad and has no memory of this guy whatsoever. So Khalees pulls the bandages off and says, "Look at me," but it doesn't help anything. Anubis just gets kind of mad and berates him and seems to have no memory of him. But he's got the amulet, so when Dr. Fate shows up, Anubis says that if you destroy Dr. Fate, he will consider the man's cause. Well, that doesn't do much good, because Dr. Fate has this incantation, which he uses to summon the power of Ra and melt the guy into a bunch of crumbling nothingness and dust. So Anubis takes off. I guess the pyramid disappears too. I'm not sure. That's a little bit left unexplained. So, the wife shows up and picks up Kent, and everything's right with the world. It was a nice self-contained story. It takes place in, Boston. Dr. Fate's tower's in Salem, I believe, Massachusetts, so it's not that far of travel. But, yeah, it was a fun issue. I like self-contained stories sometimes. You don't have to worry about getting the next issue. But as far as Dr. Fate goes, he was always kind of a peripheral character. I always liked him. So it was cool to read a story about him and not have to worry about finding part 2 or anything. But yeah, I like this issue quite a bit. The art's pretty solid. A lot of people don't like Walt Simonson's art. I think sometimes it's really awesome. Sometimes it's just kind of mediocre. But Martin Pascoe did a good job. Jerry Conway, as always, does a good job. So it was a great Silver Age book. I guess this is technically Silver Age. But yeah, it's a nice self-contained story. So if you get a chance and you like Dr. Fate, hunt this one down. It's first issue special, number 9. It had a 25-cent cover price, but you could usually track it down for about $2, $3. I wouldn't go much higher than $5, unless you're a diehard Dr. Fate fan. But that'll do it for this one. As always, thanks for watching. Oh yeah, and the cover is really cool too. I really like even though the Sphinx doesn't actually attack him, it's a cool cover. But that'll do it for this one. As always, thanks for watching and supporting the channel, and we hope to see you on the next episode. Hello and welcome to another broadcast. Today we are looking at first issue special number 10. This is Outsiders featured here, and these are new characters, not the Outsiders that teamed up with Batman or anything like that. This was written by Joe Simon and Jerry Grandinetti and Craig Fleischer. They're the team that worked on this one. And we open up with a little group of what are called freaks sitting around watching the television. One of their friends is in trouble, so they gear up and jump into some kind of car thing one of them drives and head out to find their friend. And they start singing, and we're introduced to the characters through this song. There's one named Billy that has a giant head. Then we have Lizard Johnny, the Amazing Ronnie, Harry Larry, Old Doc Scary, and Mighty Mary. And there's a fight that breaks out. They go to get their friend back, and they freak out the locals, more or less. And then they run off. And that's pretty much the entire story. We get a flashback at this point to the different characters' origins, but not all of them, just some of them. We get Johnny's origin first. He's some sort of frog-human hybrid, some sort of Dagonite, I assume, Innsmouth disease maybe. Well, the guy that found him wants to kill him, but the doctor doesn't. One of the doctors doesn't want to. Zaps the guy, steals the kid, and runs off. That's the origin story for that guy. Then it cuts to Billy, who's the son of a tailor, and he's living in the basement. And his father gets murdered by some thugs who think there's money. They see the kid, sees a death threat. They attack him, but his head's really thick and really, really huge. And he chases them out, but they burn the place. And the kid is assailed by some randos that see him coming out and think he's a monster. Then he jumps in the water. Third story is Dr. Goody, who's the doctor that saved the lizard guy earlier. He crash lands on a moon mission or a planet mission, some kind. They're going to Venus. And the rocket crashes. Some aliens find him and do some repairs on him, and they make his face all weird looking. And they come to the conclusion that he was remade in their image, not humanity's, because they'd probably never seen a human before. It's a Star Trek episode. Then we go to the fourth story, and it's just about Dr. Goody, who's really the hideous freak, and he's got a subterranean hideout, and he wears a mask during the day, and he uses his cybernetic hands, or as they say, computerized digits, to heal people. And that's the only origins we get. We don't find out about the other 2 or 3 people, so it's a bit silly. And I just made it sound more exciting than it was. Really kind of boring and silly. Pretty tepid, pretty safe for kids to read. There's nothing particularly threatening in this story. The monsters aren't that scary by today's standards. They probably weren't even that freakish for the 70s. So I'm not too impressed with that. There are characters that I don't think I've ever seen used again, and I can see why. They're kind of one-offs. Somebody was just trying to fill some space, make some new characters, but nothing particularly memorable. The cover art is way more interesting than the actual storyline. It's a lot more of a silly kind of story as opposed to a dynamic origin story. It's very, let's say, it's very forgettable and so silly for its time. So yeah, I don't think I would recommend this one to anyone. It was pretty boring, not very innovative. But that'll do it for this one. As always, thanks for listening, and we hope to see you on the next episode. Hello, and welcome back to another Bad Comic Review. Today I want to introduce you to Jonathan Drew, better known as Codename Assassin. This is first issue special number 11 with Codename Assassin, and this is an interesting character, actually. He's not much of an assassin since he uses tranquilizer darts. Jonathan Drew is this new superhero, new as of 1976, and he has telekinetic and other psychic powers. Now, this is actually a pretty interesting character. I don't recall ever having read anything about Codename Assassin. I think there may have been a very short-lived series with him, like a couple issues. But other than that, this is the only issue I can verify that I've seen him in. But he's a pretty interesting character. He's got pretty high athletics and reflexes, and he busts up the mob because this guy they call Mob Master, who has a really stupid name, but they call him Mob Master once, and I think that's a much cooler name than his real name. But yeah, so Jonathan was an ordinary guy. His parents died when he was very young, and his sister basically raised him. But then she was killed by this Mob Master. The guy's name is Victor Grumman. So pretty awful name. And when his sister was killed, he swore vengeance. So because he was in this experiment, he was able to kill or destroy the vehicle of the guys that killed his sister. He decided to wage a one-man war on the Mob Master as Codename Assassin. Well, Assassin's costume is actually kind of cool. It reminds me a little bit of Deathstroke's, but this may predate Deathstroke. I'm not entirely sure, but I kind of dig his outfit. I think he should be more of an actual assassin and less of like a tranquilizer dart, we don't kill nonsense sort of thing. This guy would be more vigilante than that. So anyway, Mob Master hires the Snake and Powerhouse. And Powerhouse is just this brick who's a big muscular guy, looks kind of fat, and he's immune to electricity. And the Snake is just some wiry, super athletic type guy. Well, we don't really see, like, they have a really cool fight with some mobsters men's, but that's about it. Otherwise, it's flashback and introduction. I think the character actually has a lot of potential if he was done right, but the way they show his powers being used, where he kind of floats across water and stuff, looks really dippy. Like, the cover image would be cool if it wasn't for those weird wave things on the sides to represent his psychic powers. I think that looks really stupid. But otherwise, I thought the character had potential. It's the book itself is kind of dated, and the way they talk, the way people are dressed is very 70s. But the concept behind the character is actually pretty cool, and I'm kind of surprised DC doesn't use him more. He would make a really cool assassin character, and he's got some pretty cool powers, but too many people seem to know about his secret identity. I would whittle that down a little bit. But this is definitely a character I'd be interested in seeing more of, because his powers are pretty cool, and he would make a really good assassin, and he is on the good guy team, so he would actually be a pretty cool character to drop in as somebody that is more of a Punisher type character, or like Vigilante, but they haven't done much with any of those characters. They've gotten a little further away from characters like this at DC and a little more PC, and this is definitely not a PC type character, and trying to force it into that mold, I think, hurts the character development potential. This character, though, does have a lot of potential, and I would like to see him in a more Punisher type role, and I think that one is somebody that could be revived as an interesting character that could have a longevity as far as its own series, maybe set in its own little universe kind of thing. As far as the broader DC universe, I don't think they're going to bring back a character like this anytime soon. But yeah, overall the art's pretty good. The story needed some work. I think it's really dated, but it is by Jerry Conway and Steve Skeets. I don't know who Steve Skeets is. With art by the Redondo Studio, and Al Milgrom is labeled as embellisher. But the art's okay. The story's good. I just think it should have been more of a Punisher type character and a little less of the foo-foo no-kill stuff. But that's my take on it. Be sure and check it out if you're interested. I like the character concept. I think it could be reworked into a slightly more violent, more adult-themed comic. But that's my take. And as always, thank you for listening, and hopefully we'll see you on the next episode. Hello and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. Today I was just finished reading first issue special number 12 featuring Starman. Now this is not the Golden Age Starman or the Starman that would appear later in James Robinson's 90s run. No, this is Disco Starman. He has what would possibly be one of the worst looking costumes in history. It's some sort of like ballerina unitard for men? Maybe for men? Not 100% convinced on that. Well, it's written by Jerry Conway and edited by him. Art by Mike Vosberg and Mike Royer. Now, it starts off with a spacecraft crashing in the Bronx and a blue man emerging. He's disoriented, where he is, of course, summarily attacked by 3 disco studs. These 3 white guys are dressed horribly, and one has this awesome afro. Then the cops show up, and we are introduced to O'Donnell and Clarkson, Colonel Magruder of the U.S. Air Force. They came to see what's going on. Cops think it's a downed plane, but the military knows it's a UFO. Well, while they're arguing over jurisdiction, it blows up, killing Clarkson. In the meantime, our new hero staggers into a grocery store for some reason, breaks in for no apparent reason, then collapses. He used a sonic gadget to get rid of a gun by the shop owner, and this shop owner thinks that could make him some money, so he takes the guy in. Meanwhile, on the moon, yeah, that's where the aliens live, is the moon. It's not an original story per se, but it is a geodesic dome hidden from Earth telescopes by force shielding, which I think may be where they got the idea for the stupid Inhumans moon base on the moon. That was redundant. Anyway, here we learn about the political nonsense that's going on with Master Comac. He took over, claimed his ascension, although he probably was handed it. Anyway, he thinks that Starman is a traitor to his people, and Starman's real name is Michael Thomas, Mikaal, because it needed to be that way. And this guy's engaged the service of a mind slaver first guardsman of the World Stone, Turan Ka. And he's sending this brutish thug with apparently superhuman strength to go and capture the Starman, Michael Thomas. And then we get a little bit of a flashback from Thomas about what happened. It turns out he's a traitor because him and his special lady Lissa were going to go warn the humans that an invasion was coming from the moon, and they killed her. And they found him guilty of treachery against the state. So he managed to escape and fled to Earth. And he tells all this to the shop owner and his wife, but they don't believe him, so he jumps out of a window, not to commit suicide, but to kind of fly away. The government and the military find another spacecraft just sitting in the harbor for some reason, and that's when we get the thug that was sent to dispatch with him, and they begin a fight in the streets of the Bronx, and that's where it ends on a cliffhanger ending that will never be resolved. I understand that Starman, this Disco Starman, did have some other appearances. I think he had a very short-lived series, and I know he did appear in the James Robinson 90s storyline where they kind of gave him some closure. I think they killed him off in a story somewhere along the line. I don't know if that was in JSA or in Starman, but I'm pretty sure they killed this one off. Anyway, the general premise wasn't bad, but the execution is pretty cheesy. It's definitely aimed at a young audience, and it's incredibly dated. It's got a real 70s feel, not just because of the costume. The dialogue's very rigid, very 70s, and it's not terribly interesting. The cover's pretty decent, but it's deceptive. That scene does not happen in the book, and the outfit you can see there is incredibly silly, but overall it's not a bad cover. So yeah, I don't know, this one was just kind of boring, didn't really do anything for me. I could see why this character didn't really last too long. They were trying to reboot Starman as a character but make him an alien this time, and it just doesn't work for me. So yeah, I'd have to say this one's probably a pass. I can see why this character didn't really take off. But that'll do it for this episode. As always, thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel, and we hope to see you on the next episode. Hello and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. Today we are looking at first issue special number 13. This is the final issue of the run, and this one features the return of the new gods. It's a self-contained story, which is kind of nice. We've got Orion coming to warn the others that the Earth is about to be attacked, and they are set upon by some parademons. These are the old-style parademons, pre-crisis, where they're more like monsters than like robots or mutated people. They actually look more like orcs. The Highfather sends Orion on a mission to stop Darkseid from destroying the Earth. The Highfather and Metron try and sneak a peek at what Darkseid's plan is, and they uncover that it is a trap, and that Darkseid has attuned his heart to the Earth's sun, so if he is killed, it'll destroy the Earth's sun. Okay, it's a little weird, but it's an interesting self-contained story. Darkseid's not quite as crazy powerful in this story. Like, he doesn't have the eye beams or anything, so when Orion gets to him, they talk about fighting. Darkseid's more of a strategist in this time period. It's an interesting story because we see Orion trying to fight his repressed rage. I like the costume he wears in this one a lot better. That's him in the center on the cover. We don't see Mr. Miracle in costume. We see him out of costume. And Barda's wearing some weird swimsuit thing that she wore in the 70s. But we do get a nice little glimpse about the new gods. We see the Source Wall. We see Granny Goodness. We see Caliban. A lot of the characters from New Gods books. So if you like the New Gods, this is definitely worth checking out. It's a pretty short story. You know, it's one issue long. It's wraps up real nice, and you do get to see a lot of the popular characters, and it's a more simplistic story because it was aimed at a much younger audience than modern comics are, so there's that too. So if you have a kid that wants to read something different, this would be a good one to dig out. You can find it for about $2 online, probably a little less. If you look around quarter bins or dollar bins, you'll probably find it. It's not an expensive issue. There's nothing mind-blowing going on. It's not a pivotal story or anything, but it's worth checking out. I recommend it. It's not a bad story. It's written by Denny O'Neil, art by Mike Vosberg, the dialogues by Denny O'Neil, plot and editing by Jerry Conway. So it's a nice self-contained little story. The art's not too bad. Pretty standard 70s fare. I don't like some of the hairstyles, but Darkseid looks really cool. He's got a real sinister look to him. So yeah, I thought it was a good story. It's a little, I'm a little beyond the target demographic for this book, but not bad overall. It's worth checking out if you get a chance. But that'll do it for this one. As always, thanks for listening, and we hope to see you on the next episode.